My name is Lynn Wells, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ms. Kristina O'Brien, the Principal Deputy Director of Strategic Logistics in the Logistics Directorate of the Joint Staff, otherwise known as the J4. We look forward to a most interesting and informative interview to kick off our Senior Defense Logistics track. Kristina, welcome. I understand that one of the pillars of the new joint warfighting concept will be contested logistics. Could you explain for us what this means, and also what it means for those who don't normally deal in logistics, but for whom I'm sure this will be a very important idea?
Okay, well, you bet. First of all, thank you so much for providing me and the Joint Staff the opportunity to share a little bit about what some of the major activities that we have going on now and how they may, tie in with some of your work there. So just again, thanks so much for this opportunity, and very excited and honored to have an opportunity to share some thoughts. So again, just thank you. And in terms of contested logistics, that's become like almost a new sort of buzzword, right? We're starting to hear that a lot, and how that is so important right now as we start to work on the joint concept for contested logistics. So that is actually one of 4 sort of supporting concepts under the joint warfighting concept. So it's been in work for, and that's sort of overarching joint warfighting in terms of 2030. So we then have 4 supporting concepts: fires, information advantage, C2, and then contested logistics. So key thing with the contested logistics, or the JCCL, as we call it, is we're going to have 3 main lines of effort. So first one is integrated logistics command and control. And this is really overarching to everything, right? Because unless we have really integrated data, integrated information, that ability to have, visibility of the total picture, nothing else we need to do is really going to be able to happen the way we need to. So log C2, and then followed by power projection. And we used to often take power projection, or even just like getting out of the homeland to where we need to go, sort of for granted. But we can't do that anymore, because we could be contested on the homeland in ways that maybe we haven't previously had to think about, such as cyber attacks and impacts those could have on even our commercial logistics infrastructure, and how they could impact our lines of communication. So power projection from the homeland, and then once we kind of get to that, next place, how do we project power from there, whether that be supporting or just logistics in general. And then finally, sustainment for distributed operations. And when we think of kind of like old school logistics, we've got these big piles, iron mountains of stuff, right? That is not 2030. That's when we look backwards. So how, when we look forward, do we operate in this kind of distributed environment where we're moving very fast, multiple domains? How do we sustain that type of fight and that type of environment? So much more distributed, fast moving, no iron mountains that we can just necessarily go back to and continually pull from. Might be more of a push. And then how do our partners, how do they play into that? How does the industrial base play into sustainment? All of those factors as well. So those are really those 3 lines of effort: integrated C2, power projection, and sustainment for distributed operations. So as we look to 2030, how are we going to enable that? And how is logistics going to enable that overarching joint warfight with those 3 lines of effort? Over.
Thank you. Well, so there's a lot of things happening in the public and private technological sectors. I just wonder how you see defense logistics evolving the next few years as a result of these technological and procedural changes that are sort of all around us, and supply chain modification and logistics procedures that are everywhere we look. Over.
You bet. Great question. Thank you. And I'll start by going back to that first line of effort under contested logistics and integrated logistics command and control. So real world, COVID and operating logistics in a COVID environment is contested logistics. And as we look back to like April, May, June, as we're trying to just do our regular day-to-day distribution, such as supporting the warfighter in the Middle East, we had closed borders. We were unable to, in some cases, get our contractors where we needed them. We had to watch the supply lines. Many things slowed down. So it was very much a contested environment. So it was a great lesson learned for us. In addition, we had to have visibility of our personal protective equipment. So everyone heard about N95 masks as we look back to March and April. So where are the Department of Defense's N95 masks? Well, the Defense Health Agency owns some of them. The Defense Logistics Agency has some of them. The services have some of them. And we did not have a clear picture of where are and how many N95 masks do we have? How many do we need? How many do we use? What should our projected requirement be? So that's a really simple example, but one that we lived through in this environment where we said we have to have a clear picture of what we have, and that is just one commodity, right? This is 2020. So we had these different stovepipe systems. We didn't have good visibility. As we go forward, having that and all the buzzwords, right? Data analytics, artificial intelligence to enable kind of us to see our data better, how 5G will come into that. But we have to start by integrating our data, having our data, and then using those analytics on top of it. So when we think about not having Iron Mountains, but being able to operate in a distributed environment, what's like Waze for logistics, right? If the road is closed, my GPS is going to send me in a different direction. So how is that going to work for logistics in a fight, right? So bringing in a lot of those analytics and those capabilities that our partners in the commercial sector have now to start really applying those to logistics is going to be such a huge thing as we move forward. So that is kind of one of the immediate areas that we continue to look at of how we'll work with the commercial, the private sector to enable us to continue to move forward to operate in this future environment. Over.
Thank you. Well, if you're a non-service logistician, what other changes should the operating forces be beginning to make now to plan for this different type of logistics environment? You've talked about no Iron Mountains, or that kind of implies just something approaching a just-in-time delivery system. How does that work in a combat environment? But more to the point here is, what should the normal operating forces be doing to be prepared to take advantage of these new logistics opportunities better?
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that question. So I think one of the major elements of this is it's not just like logisticians are doing logistics, right? Everyone needs to be thinking about logistics and the impacts of logistics. And as we look at those three lines of effort, one of the required capabilities that kind of fits under there is to reduce demand. And that could mean a lot of different things, right? And one of them is just, okay, we don't want to, the soldier on the ground needs to use less energy and potentially have less requirement for food. Well, what really does less energy mean, right? Does that mean additional contracts for wherever that location is? Does that mean they have a new type of micro generator that uses nuclear power so we don't have to get them fuel? Does that mean that the jets that they are refueling on the ground actually take less energy? So, really the bigger picture, demand reduction can mean so many things. So that's just one example, but the process really, it's for everyone. It's not just about like the actual logistician on the ground, right? So it really has to drive a different way of thinking. We also have to start implementing, getting all these ideas and requirements into our JSIDS process now. So what type of capabilities do we need in 2030? What do those look like? And they can't be necessarily service specific, right? We really need to be thinking with a joint and integrated kind of hat on, right? So all of that has to start now. And part of that is from the Joint Requirements Oversight Committee, kind of implementing really the way this this should work all along, but rather than just services saying, hey, here's our requirement, let's work this through the process, somewhat of a top-down approach as well, where from the functional capabilities board, we kind of look down and go, hey, this is a requirement we have, joint team, our services, how can we get to that requirement together and ensure that it's integrated and that it kind of meets the needs, or maybe it's a system of systems approach that meets those requirements. So it's just a thinking much more broader and with a joint hat on. Another point that I'll add is, and this is a great lesson learned from COVID as well, left of bang. So if we know, like we look at COVID as an example, PPE, and even from a national perspective, we needed more N95 masks. So how do we get them? And they had to really reach out and get new agreements in place and rev up the industrial base and do a number of different things. Well, if we know now as a that we may need more munitions, what agreements can we put in place now, whether that be incentives, whether that be second and third order partnerships, different agreements, just a backup warm status to enable certain capabilities. What can we do now to enable action quickly if we need it later? The same thing could be used for access basing and agreements with partners, right? What types of agreements can we have in place now that if we need them later, they're there? Contracts, commercial agreements for capabilities on the ground, all those kinds of things, right? Sometimes we're like, well, we'll do that when we need it. Well, what if we don't have time when we need it, right? What can we actually do now? What actions can we take really left of bang to enable us to have some of those things in place if and when we need them? So I think those are a couple of the key items, kind of working some of that top-down joint perspective, working sort of a left of bang, ensuring that logistics is thought of through the entire process, not just logistics as something for logisticians. And then finally, kind of like speed of relevance, right? Some of our processes take a long time. And we look at even the tech industry now, they do sprints. Something doesn't work, we try something new. We move on from that, we try something a little different. We don't inherently operate that way, right? It just takes forever. Well, how can we shorten that? How can we get more agile, right? Because we need to try and fail and try again to enable some of these new capabilities, and even us, say, using artificial intelligence with some of our logistics data to try and fail and try again. But we just need to work faster and be at the speed of relevance. So that's kind of across the board. So those are maybe 4 things that are some of the changes that we need to be looking at as we move forward to operate in this new competitive and strategic contested logistics environment. Over.
Thank you. You mentioned the term JSIDs earlier. For our non-Defense Department colleagues, could you explain that just briefly?
Absolutely, and I should have spelled that out. So we have and I'll use the term like JROC, but the Joint Requirements Oversight Council or Committee, but basically it's our capabilities process. And if I need a new capability, let's say the ability to distribute fuel over the shore, I would as a service potentially, or as a combatant command, sort of draft up what that requirement looks like, and then I would get that requirement validated through a number of different boards. So it would start likely at the Logistics Functional Capabilities Board, and then work its way up through a process that actually takes it to the vice chairman. And then there would be follow-on requirements statement, requirements validation documents that would be developed and reviewed again by the board, and the process would continue. And it takes X number of weeks, it takes X number of months, it's continued to be reviewed. The process works, it just takes time. So how can we speed that process up, right? And again, it works, it's got the checks and balances it needs. It's just how can we continue to make that faster and then try and fail if we need to faster, and then get back up and try again.
Thank you. So these are a lot of changes internally. How does this relate to interoperability with allies? You've talked about pre-signed contracts and things like that, but just in terms of the way our allies operate compared with how we will be operating.
So again, great question. And as we look at, even the National Defense Strategy, it's all about working with our allies and partners. So we can't, as we look to 2030 and as we build our concept for contested logistics, we really can't operate in that environment. We need to be we need our partners, we need our allies, right? So I think one very important thing, and this came out in a discussion we had a couple of weeks ago with some of our partners, was you can't make, even like as you're developing new systems, our allies an afterthought. We just don't want to like bolt on, oh, they need to be able to use this too, right? It needs to be part of the discussion and the process from start to finish. So it's always about how will we be integrated with our allies and partners as we use this to ensure that we are interoperable. So there's kind of that interoperability piece, but then also I think there is the kind of the access and partnership piece in terms of what capabilities do they have, maybe from a logistics perspective, that we can use instead of having to use ours. And that in a way goes back to maybe demand reduction. So if we are in country X and country X can provide us fuel, can we get those contracts or some type of agreement in place in advance? And we have a lot of those already. What about for food or commodities? What about for other engineering capabilities? What can we use that's there, and what can we get in place now? So lots of opportunities to share and partner to enable like action later or even now, because the more we kind of work that and exercise that, the easier it is if we were to have to use it. I'm a big fan of the AXA, the Acquisition and Cross Service Agreement, which enables U.S. and our partners to sometimes share commodities in kind, or we can use the AXA agreement to purchase fuel from another country. So the more we do that and the more we use those agreements, the easier it is when we actually need to use it. And that could be in a HADR type environment. We could be helping out with humanitarian assistance. It could be because we're in support of some kind of other operational effort. But that's a great opportunity to kind of practice interoperability and just partnership to ensure that when we need it, we're able to execute that simply and effectively. Over.
So what would you like the private sector to be doing more of to support this logistics transformation?
So some of this kind of goes back to, I think, how we're trying to learn how to be faster, which the private sector can already do, right? So helping us kind of get to that speed of relevance, I think as we continue to move forward, will be so important. And then I think resiliency. So in some cases, kind of old school Department of Defense single points of failure, right? So we need to kind of look at what are those, and in our supply chains as well. And COVID kind of highlighted this for us. What are some of those points of failures? And then how can we work together, whether that be through incentives or agreements, or to kind of make sure that we have things in place left of bang that we need to have. So the Joint Staff has been doing some work with our OSD industrial policy partners, because they are the lead on a lot of those things. But even the Joint Concept for Contested Logistics, which says, hey, we really need to work with the commercial industry and ensure that we have some of these agreements in place. What do those look like? So we'll be kind of asking industry some of those questions. What are opportunities, and working with our industrial policy partners to potentially move forward on and explore areas where maybe if we have a single point of failure, we can move beyond that, and it could really be something where potentially everybody wins with the results of building resiliency into some of our supply chains.
Thank you. So you talked about resiliency. Let me talk about a specific type of that, which is cyber resilience. As we're dealing with the Internet of Things, as we're dealing with basically, in transit visibility, we're dealing with a whole batch of approaches which improve dramatically the effectiveness, but also expand the attack surface of vulnerability. And too often, the cyber security, cyber resilience is sort of added on as at the end. There are lots of high-level pronouncements that say this is important, but the mid-level execution often doesn't keep pace with those. So I'm just wondering, what is the logistics enterprise doing to try to enhance our cyber resilience going forward?
So such a great question, and so important to really what we are doing now and going forward. And if we go back to that joint concept for contested logistics and that LOE number 2, power projection. So that starts in the homeland. And again, previously it sort of just took that all for granted. Well, now our transportation systems, they're generally commercial networks, right? Which means they are vulnerable. And we've seen that real world where even some of our partner nations, ports, the cyber intrusions, it could happen on for any of our commercial industries and really have an impact. So that has really highlighted the importance of working with commercial entities in terms of cybersecurity and how impacts to the commercial distribution and transportation industries could impact the Department of Defense. So there have actually, through the J6 channels, there have been a number of exercises working with the whole of government to start really looking at some of those challenges. And sometimes logistics impacts are kind of an afterthought, but the J4 team in logistics is really starting to partner more with J6. And I think that's really a kind of a big next step that maybe before they're the comm guys over there. Well, not anymore. The logistics guys must be partnered with our cyber and our communications experts. And an example of this going forward is as we've written these supporting concepts, we've been very tied in with the J6 community. And we're actually going to be standing up an OPT to ensure that we are completely synced as we look at kind of cyber vulnerabilities and the things that the J6 community are doing and how important they are in terms of ensuring that we are able to do our role as logisticians, particularly in that commercial sector and protecting our data. So going forward, I think whereas logistics is off here, whatever, the cyber guys are taking care of business, we will very, very much be in sync and partnered going forward. And the security of our transportation systems is so important. So that is a very strong relationship that we're building. And as we go forward, we'll continue that and we'll continue to grow it over.
So glad to hear that. So let me, for a final question then, what message would the DoD senior logistics leaders most like to send now to stakeholders, both inside DoD and out?
So I think as we look forward to like the fight of 2030, it is no longer, it is an all domain fight, right? And that's kind of one of those buzzwords now, but we look at cyber, we look at space, air, land, sea. Logistics is part of all of that, right? So important that it is all interrelated and it's all domain, and we need to be thinking about that in everything that we do as logisticians. The loggies need to be completely integrated as we figure out how we're going to fight in all of those domains. Partnerships remain so important. Working with our allies and partners in everything that we do, we need our allies and partners to enable to really execute logistics. So important that they too are all a part of our planning from the very beginning. Very much all about flexibility, resiliency, and not always being efficient, but having to be effective. And to be effective, that brings in that kind of resiliency and the capability to be flexible. And when you put all of that together, along with kind of our ability to have visibility of data, we must have unity of effort. And unity of effort is the whole expanse of working really across the joint logistics enterprise. And that is really a whole of government approach, whole of nation approach, whole of world when we bring in our allies and partners. So how do we all work together with that unity of effort to enable logistics across the entire joint logistics enterprise? So I think that is really kind of key, that this is all domain, we all have to work together, but we must have unity of effort across the entire logistics enterprise to enable us to continue to operate into the future. Over.
Chris, thank you so very much. I really appreciate your time today. And we have a great panel following up here that will amplify your thoughts. And so it's been a pleasure talking with you, and all the best to defense logisticians everywhere and going forward. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you so much for your time. I know the follow-on panel will be absolutely terrific, and I'm sure that they'll get some great questions to respond to as well. So really looking forward to that. And again, just thank you so much for your time and for the opportunity to share some of the current activities, initiatives that we have here in terms of joint logistics and the entire joint logistics enterprise and where we're going into the future.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Take care.